Welcome to Phoenix Podcast, hosted by Moanian, where we deep dive into economics and politics. Today, we're going to be looking at a pretty interesting take on the military strength of some really powerful economies in the world. You'd think. Strong economy, strong military. But does that really hold true? Let's talk about some of our friends over in Europe and then up north in Canada.
This analysis is really fascinating because it kind of picks apart that assumption. You have these countries like France, Italy, Germany, the UK, and these are economic powerhouses, right? But when you really start looking at their militaries, it's a little different.
Yeah, so what is it exactly that makes it seem underwhelming? Their military stuff.
Well, one of the big things that they point out is that their air power is surprisingly limited. France, for example, their economy is worth trillions of dollars, but they only have about 100 advanced fighter jets.
Wow.
Italy, similarly sized economy, has even fewer. Germany and the UK, you see a similar trend there.
So, help me understand this a little bit more. Why is it such a big deal to have a smaller number of fighter jets?
Well, think about it in today's world. Air superiority is absolutely crucial. You need a strong air force if you want to deter aggression, if you want to protect your airspace, and also to support ground troops. If you're lacking in that department, it puts you at a disadvantage, especially if you're going up against a country that has a much larger, more advanced air force.
Okay, so I see what you're saying. But is it just about the numbers, or are there other things that are kind of missing from the equation here as well?
Oh, yeah, that's just the tip of the iceberg. The analysis also points out that these European nations are missing some pretty crucial pieces of military equipment. We're talking about things like long-range bombers. They can strike deep into enemy territory. Super carriers, that project power globally. AWACS, those are like flying command centers. They give you a huge advantage in air combat. And advanced missile systems that can hit targets from miles away. These are the kinds of assets that make a military truly formidable. And they're really conspicuously absent in a lot of these European countries.
So they're missing the heavy hitters, so to speak.
Exactly.
It sounds like they might be relying on someone else to fill those gaps.
Right. And it kind of begs the question, are these countries relying a little too heavily on the U.S. for security? Are they becoming, as the analysis suggests, kind of freeloaders?
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point, because it kind of gets to the heart of, this critique. Now, we've talked about Europe, but the analysis also takes aim at Canada, which, they're known for peacekeeping, not exactly known for being a military powerhouse.
Right. Canada has that image.
Yeah.
Of being like peaceful, very diplomatic.
Right.
So does this analysis challenge that perception?
It definitely challenges it a bit. It highlights their very limited air force, which relies on outdated F-18 Hornets, by a lack of modern equipment like attack helicopters,
right,
or substantial navy.
So is the critique saying that Canada can't even defend itself, let alone contribute to global security?
Well, it definitely raises questions about their ability to respond effectively in a high-intensity conflict. Now, there could be various reasons for that. Their military choices, geography, strategic doctrine, maybe even budget constraints play a role. But the analysis argues that ultimately those choices have left them ill-equipped to handle the complexities of modern warfare.
So this is getting pretty serious. We're talking about wealthy, developed nations potentially being unprepared for some major conflicts. What are the implications of that? Especially when you consider something like the conflict in Ukraine. That's where things get even more interesting. The analysis really digs into Europe's response to the conflict. And let's just say, it's not very flattering.
Well, we'll have to dig into that a little bit more when we come back. This is Phoenix Podcast, hosted by Moanian. We'll be right back with part 2 of our deep dive into European and Canadian military capabilities.
So we were just talking about how this analysis kind of really criticizes Europe's response to the conflict in Ukraine. What is it exactly that's so problematic about their support?
Well, they point to a real hesitancy from European countries to provide Ukraine with the kind of substantial military aid they needed. They were very slow to send crucial weapons like HIMARS and Javelin missile. These are systems that have proven to be real game changers on the battlefield.
So it's not even just that. They lack certain capabilities themselves, but they're also hesitant to share the ones that they do have. Right, and it really feeds into this whole freeloader argument that these countries aren't really willing to step up and share the burden of defending these democratic values, even when faced with, such a clear and present threat, like Russia's aggression.
You mentioned earlier that the analysis calls some of these European countries leeches. I mean, that's pretty harsh language.
It is, but I think it reflects a growing frustration with what some people see as this imbalance in the transatlantic relationship. For decades, Europe has benefited from the U.S. security umbrella. They've relied on American military might to deter aggression and really ensure their safety. But the analysis argues that this reliance has created a sense of complacency. It's allowed these countries to neglect their own defense capabilities and really shirk their responsibilities on the world stage.
It makes me think about something else that they brought up, too.
Yeah.
Which was this whole issue of electronic warfare.
Yeah.
That even with these advanced fighter jets, you're still vulnerable without the right technology.
Yeah.
What exactly did they mean by that?
Yeah, they were talking about the growing importance of things like surveillance, intelligence gathering, and jamming capabilities in modern conflicts. You can have the most powerful fighter jet in the world, but if the enemy can jam your radar, disrupt your communications, track your every move, you're basically flying blind.
Look at having a fancy sports car.
Yeah.
But no headlights or GPS. Not very useful in the dark.
Exactly. And the analysis claims that many European countries are really lagging behind in this crucial area. They don't have enough of the specialized aircraft, the equipment, and the trained personnel that are needed to effectively counter these electronic warfare threats.
Right.
And that makes them incredibly vulnerable in a modern conflict, especially against a technologically sophisticated adversary.
So if we're putting all this together, it's a pretty damning assessment of European and Canadian military capabilities. Limited air power, missing crucial equipment, hesitant to provide support, vulnerable to electronic warfare. I mean, it's a long list of shortcomings.
It is. It's a real wake-up call. And I think this analysis is urging these countries to take a hard look in the mirror and ask themselves some tough questions. Are they truly prepared to face the challenges of a rapidly changing world? Are they willing to invest in the capabilities they need to defend themselves and their allies? Or will they continue to rely on the U.S. to bail them out, and risk further strain on that transatlantic relationship and potentially jeopardizing their own security?
Those are some heavy questions for sure. And it seems like the answers could have some big implications for the future of global security. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the specifics of military hardware to the broader geopolitical landscape. But what does it all mean for the average person? Why should they care about this?
That's a great question. And here's why you should care. We live in an interconnected world where conflicts and instability in one region can quickly spill over into others. And if key players on the global stage, like these European nations and Canada, aren't prepared to shoulder their share of the burden, it creates a vacuum that can be exploited by those who seek to disrupt the international order. And that ultimately affects everyone, whether it's through economic instability or the threat of terrorism or the erosion of democratic values.
It was not just about abstract geopolitical maneuvering. It has real-world consequences for people's lives.
Absolutely.
This analysis is a reminder that security and stability aren't just givens. They require constant vigilance, investment, and a willingness to stand up for what you believe in. And if those who are capable of contributing shirk their responsibilities, we all pay the price. This has been Phoenix Podcast, hosted by Amin Moinian, and we want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the complex world of military capabilities and global security. So we spent this whole episode unpacking some really harsh criticisms of European and Canadian military capabilities. If these nations are really as unprepared as this analysis suggests, what can they actually do about it?
Well, I think the first step is acknowledging the problem. They need to move past the complacency and recognize that the world has changed. Relying on the U.S. for security, it might have worked in the past, but it's becoming increasingly unsustainable.
So what does taking responsibility actually look like? Is it just about spending more money on defense?
It's more than just throwing money at the problem. They need to seriously rethink their defense strategies and their priorities, for one thing. They need to invest in modernizing their equipment and closing those capability gaps that we talked about. Air power, missile systems, electronic warfare, the whole 9 yards.
But new equipment's expensive, and it takes time to develop and deploy. Are there any quicker fixes?
One thing they can do is improve cooperation and coordination within NATO, by boosting resources, sharing intelligence, and conducting joint exercises. They can make their existing forces more effective and present a more united front.
So instead of having, 20 small disjointed militaries, they can function more like one larger, more cohesive force.
Exactly. And it's not just about military solutions. They also need to address the underlying political and economic factors that contribute to this. Perceived free riding, that means having some, frank conversations about burden sharing within NATO and making sure that everyone is pulling their weight.
So lots of tough choices.
Yeah.
And potentially some uncomfortable conversations. But what happens if they don't act? What's the worst case scenario here?
Well, the consequences could be pretty dire. If a major conflict were to erupt, they could find themselves woefully unprepared, unable to defend their own territory or support their allies. That could lead to loss of sovereignty, economic turmoil, and a further erosion of democratic values on the world stage.
So the stakes are pretty high. It's not just about theoretical military strength. It's about the future of these nations and the security of the entire Western world.
Yeah, I think this analysis serves as a stark warning. It's a call to action for these countries to wake up, step up, and take responsibility for their own security before it's too late.
Well, that's sobering thought, and it leaves us with a lot to ponder. Thanks for joining us on Phoenix Podcast, hosted by Amin Moyanian. We hope this deep dive has given you some valuable insights into the complex world of global security and the challenges facing some of the world's most powerful nations.